Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is Stefan Triplett, and I'm the Interim Assistant Director for the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. Tonight's event showcases visual artist and filmmaker Shikeith, who is the August Wilson House Fall and Winter Fellow in residency with us here at the center. We're so excited for this event and honored to be in space with Shikeith and all of you tonight. The Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, or CAAPP as you might know it, was founded in 2016. It's a creative think tank for African American and African diasporic poetries and poetics. Our mission is to highlight, promote, and share the work of African American and African diasporic poets, and to pollinate cross-disciplinary conversation and collaboration. Our programming aims to present exciting live poetry and conversation, contextualize the meaning of that work, and archive it for future generations. It's perfect then that we get to share space with Shikeith tonight. We at CAAPP find Shikeith's work knowing and brilliant. Shikeith uses visual poetics, the poetics of motion, light, and shadows to make us ponder the histories and alternatives of our past, present, and futures. In his exhibitions, Shikeith uses space and architecture to create something wholly new and wondrous in the contemporary worlds of both Black and queer art. Again, we're so thrilled to have him. There will be a Q&A toward the end of the event, so be sure to use the Ask a Question function in the chat on Crowdcast, and we'll get some questions over to Shikeith. We do encourage you to use the chat throughout as well. Additionally, for those viewing at home, we recommend using headphones for the best auditory experience during the video performances. Our programming may look a little different this year in this virtual space, but despite this, CAAPP continues to support individual writers, artists, scholars, and to prioritize providing opportunities for poets and artists in the Pittsburgh community and beyond. More information can be found on our website at capp.pitt.edu. Some of you may know CAAPP from last semester's Black Study Intensive programming, of which is archived both here on Crowdcast and on our YouTube channel. We believe Shikeith is the perfect bridge for us tonight, taking us into our programming in this new year. Both this fellowship and this event could not have been completed without the support of the August Wilson House. So without further ado, here's Dr. Irvin Dyer, board member of the August Wilson House.
All right, thank you so much, Stefan. So it is my pleasure to be with you this evening and to represent the August Wilson House. I'm looking forward to hearing from Shikeith and learning more about his incredible work. Before I talk and share more of his resume and his bio, I want to talk just a moment about some of the work we're doing with the August Wilson House. So the August Wilson House is a cultural and community center located in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. And we're actually located in a space we're rehabbing at home where August Wilson was born and lived for the first part of his life. The work that we do supports building on the legacy of August Wilson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. So we go into the community, we support artists, we support storytelling. We try to build sort of cultural and historical legacy that's connected to the Hill District. And we're very pleased to have this partnership with CAAPP to support this work. And we're pleased to welcome Shikeith as our winter and fall fellow. And he's an amazing, incredible artist. And I'm going to talk a little bit now just about and share some of his incredible bio. Let me get to that and pull that up. So Shikeith is a native of Philadelphia, but he now makes his home in Pittsburgh. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Integrative Arts from Penn State University and went on to receive his Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture from the Yale University School of Art. His work investigates the experience of Black men within and around concepts of psychic space, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. His work has also recently been featured in solo exhibitions, including institutions such as the Alexander Brest Museum and Gallery at Jacksonville University in Florida, at the Locust Projects in Miami, at Atlanta Contemporary in Atlanta, and at the Mattress Factory Museum of Contemporary Art here in Pittsburgh. In 2019, Shikeith received a Painters and Sculptors grant from the Joan Mitchell Foundation. In addition to the August Wilson House Fellowship in 2020, he also was awarded the Art Matters Foundation grant and was selected for the 2020-2021 Leslie Lohman Museum Artist Fellowship. He also has current exhibitions showing Feeling, the Spirit in the Dark at the Mattress Factory Museum of Contemporary Art in Pittsburgh, Ceremonies at Yosi Milo Gallery in New York City, Enunciated Life at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles, and Imagine Otherwise at the Cleveland Museum of Contemporary Art. So we welcome him this evening, and I look forward to his chat. And Stefan, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening so I can share some of my work. Thank you to Stefan and Irvin from CAAPP in the August Wilson House for this opportunity to make some new things. And, in the midst of this pandemic, it's been very difficult for a lot of artists. So I'm really happy to be able to produce things, though virtually. Before I go into sharing my work, I wanted to introduce two projects that I worked on during this fellowship. The first is a work by Jalen Strong, who is an incredible poet, artist, writer, librarian, curator based in New York. He has presented work at Brown University, Pratt Institute, MoMA PS1. And he created this video with Chad Murdoch, another talented filmmaker in New York City, responding to my installation, Feeling the Spirit in the Dark, and it's called Memory's Blood.
Have you swam in memory of your own blood? Static simmers from the cylindrils of the cones, like a whisper has entered through the window. When my mother had the surgery on her back, she lay repose. That is when the bottom side of patent leather boy black dress shoe no longer scraped the cement of Mount Joy. Baptist it was, yet my throbbing temples tell me I had never soaked in the tub, never slept in the bosom of God, have hardly tasted his blood, have never praised the wetness of his vast palms. Look at me. From some sea I have awashed. In my mind there is an echo of thick little hairs on my head, morose-colored pupils. There is Venus, yet who am I? Another unnamed breath traveling up a spine. A hand never squeezing away the particles from passage to my nose. A touch never flipping my back. I wonder if this is the dirt I feel. Underneath the voice is a close to silent ululation, an earthquake of bordering lip skin, a vague tremor bursting into an eye. And the umbrage of forgetting is a feeling, and the record always makes a sound. Sometimes only a crackle, like the way an answer to remembering kinda falls on you like spittle from a lever close to your nose. There is something about our bodies, and only ours, that makes it feel like we are bedabbling together, or damn, we are always wave swaying into each other's black. And I think the church burned down, something to be said about redemption. So I call my mother, who confirms, and somehow the question opens, the rupture, and a secret crawls from her neck. And like that, now I know. What do we do with the past? I've decided to exhale.
Thank you, Jalen, for that incredible work. Living here in Pittsburgh, you get to be around some phenomenal talent, phenomenal queer talent, especially. And the next person is Willie Lee Kennard III, who I met during my time living here. And Willie is a poet, art director, and sound artist forged in the American South, specifically South Carolina, which my family is from, and I'm claiming. uh, but Willie and I worked on these two videos together over at my installation at the Mattress Factory, Feeling the Spirit in the Dark, and his work is spiritual. It's incredible, and I can't wait to share it with you right now.
What we wayward do. All spells begin with water. Rod in hand, flicker it against the stinging sky. Mom and them stir the air to tears. Casting is what they call us girls putting in work around here. And yes, we witches are fishermen, with glamours and men's overalls, mere hours before morning stilettos, so long as fish rise to the surface. Believe me, at the edge, we make them levitate, each saddling our silence as if any noise unweighted would loose a daemon, slick-scaled and wide eyes with no bellies by which to find it bound. Where I'm from, folk learn conjure early, the kind of favor you pray over a pole for, and what is Greek is still a gospel here. Jesus is a sigil with light bread, and there is always a pilot and a piercing before cooking, a struggle so steady we laugh at our buckets. That is, yes, we fillet the fish with care. Cricket fed and fried light, worked to the bone. This how we kill our familiars. There is nothing, then something, something, then nothing. It is wrist work, it is sobering, it is holy. We gather, we murmur, we swallow in worship.
What I wanted to speak to today is another aspect, or the opposite of the pornographic, because it's really hard. I know it is for me, and I'm sure it is for you. Andrea Dworkin yesterday spoke about the necessity of our knowing our enemy. Well, in order to know our enemy, we have to expose ourselves to some really energy-sapping things. And to do that, we need all the strength we can get. We need each one of us to deal from a place where we are most powerful. And what I wanted to talk about today was the erotic as a source of that power.
Obad, nocturne. Harder, he pants into the scruff of my neck. Our labored breath condensing as my nigga pulls my hips into wolfish grind. From a distance, we are two curs fogging a parked Chrysler, though this only half accurate. In our nest, we transcend sexed things. White hot spangles like dead gods, the glow of us pulsing brighter and brighter in turn. I've never fucked before, but this is how he wets my nose. Open, like a howl, a deafening unhinging of worship. From the back, this, the way he whines, throwing his head in praise. It is ancient choreography, how we fever the dark's bones, convince the night to do our bidding. We collapse into each other. The moon of him eclipsing the fullness of me, the rift of us folding unto new darkness, and what are we but ravenous? Here we devour dusk, spitting back cosmic bones, mouths brimming, tearing the sky black.
Thank you, Jalen and Willie, for working with me on this project. And thank you for taking us to church online. I'll begin to talk about my own work, starting with some of the earlier photography that a lot of you may recognize from me. But just to give a little bit of background, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Now currently living in Pittsburgh, PA, where I've been since 2018, following my MFA experience at the Yale School of Art, where I received my MFA in sculpture. My work investigates these ideas of psychic space or the psychological landscape of Black manhood, particularly in the afterlife of slavery, meaning there are these ephemeral presences that continue to haunt the bodies of Black men, especially Black queer men, such as racism, homophobia, and so forth. And I am trying to construct spaces that reconcile or push through a sort of indeterminate space for an erotic to arise. So I think it's good to start from the beginning of where I sort of began with my work. And this is the photograph entitled Dreams in Black and White. Dreams in Black and White was literally pulled from my subconscious. Growing up, I dealt with a lot of hardship in relation to other Black men and boys. I was ridiculed, obviously, for my queerness, and I would, as a result of that, I would have a reoccurring dream slash nightmare where I would be on a roof and a group of boys who had harmed me or one way or another would be chasing after me. And the only way for me to evade them would be a balloon that I would go to reach for, but would ultimately fall to my death. I could never reach it. And I would have this dream um, through high school, through undergrad, through a lot of my young adult life. Um, and wanting to transition into making fine art photography, this was the first place I went to start thinking about what that dream meant. Um, and the balloon became a sort of motif across a repeated motif across my work um, to symbolize that experience, that dream. And this photograph was taken on a roof in Philly, and we can go on to the next one. A lot of the earlier work was made out of a sort of urgency to bridge the gap between me and other Black men, um, to have conversations about our restrictive emotionality that had been ingrained into our identities, particularly a symptom of toxic masculinity, as we know. And I wanted to work on a series of portraiture that portrayed Black men crying. And in this particular series, this triptych is entitled Where Troubles Melt Like Lemon Drops. And it's a unique story behind this photograph because I had the idea that, I was going to go into the studio and make this work with this young man crying and using a stimulant um, around his eyes to provoke those tears. And unfortunately, the stimulant didn't even work. The chemical wasn't strong enough. He couldn't let himself down, his guard down enough to become vulnerable. And this is a very early lesson for me as a young artist about transactional experiences between me and my subjects and the people that I work with. And what ended up happening was we started to have a conversation about our time um, growing up in Philly and some of the hardships we faced and how we're sort of navigating that. And in the midst of that conversation, he began to cry, and that's how I made the portraits. Next work is The Moment You Doubt Whether You Can Fly, You Cease Forever to Be Able to Do It. It's my first installation work, actually, which was a site-specific work here in Pittsburgh at a experimental gallery called Bunker Projects. And this was in 2014. Again, very early work, sort of illustrating that dream that had been haunting me for a very long time. And you could sort of see some of the earlier materiality and how I sort of started to describe this that still lingers around my work with the soil, especially. And so this work was sort of just a self-portrait in a way um, to think about death and rebirth and time and the next work was is the cover of Donnell Smith's "Don't Call Us Dead," which was actually a stencil inside of that installation. Um, because at that point, I had continued to have that dream for a period of time, and then the last time I had that dream, I grabbed the balloon and I floated away, and I made this work as a result of that. And so, a lot of the earlier work was very cathartic in that way. Um, Again, going on to the next image is a video called hashtag Black Men Dream. It's my first documentary that I've ever made. And initially it began again out of urgency. Um, it was created in between 2013 and 2014 uh, at the time of civil unrest here in America. It was sort of at the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, the death of Trayvon Martin, and so many other people who we've lost. And I sort of felt a need to make something to respond to that, but then also start to think about um, Black men understanding the multiplicity to their humanity, and then also wanting to engage with a community that I hadn't before had the chance to. And so I went around between Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and New York City, filming people who were either strangers or people who I sort of knew, or and then close friends, um, posing a series of questions that were very simple. What makes you sad? What makes you happy? Um, and it was meant to just sort of be a Instagram post. I had no idea what it would become. Um, and so this is hashtag Black Men Dream.
To become a man.
I think I became an honest man, which I think is the more important part. In June 2005, when I admitted out loud to people I cared about that I was gay. And in that moment, I think I was finally owning who I was supposed to be. I think I got exposed to a lot of things early as a child, so that aged me in a way. But I think if you're not operating from the space where you're being yourself completely and totally, you're not whole. So for me, that was that moment where, okay, now I am a man.
Technically, I became a man when I left the house at 18. Figuratively, when I was able to fully take care of myself.
How would you describe your interaction with other Black males in your youth?
Other Black males my age don't understand me, and I try my best to coax egos, and it doesn't really work out too well. So I kind of avoid them, to be honest.
I got picked on. I was always the Black boy that sounds white or talks white. So not great.
I shrunk a lot. I was already a very short kid, but I was never one that liked sports or even hip hop or anything like that. So in my neighborhood, I got along with most of the other Black boys. I had 2 older brothers, and my father was around it. So I had a lot of Black men present in my life, but I think that I was always trying to hide certain parts of myself to try to gain their acceptance. And I didn't necessarily participate in what they like to do, but I definitely hid what I liked that they didn't necessarily find acceptable.
Interacting with Black kids here, or Black youth, wasn't the best. I spent a lot of time in the library by myself reading, because I just didn't fit in. And I tried to fit in, changed up my whole wardrobe, wearing baggies and stuff, but it didn't really work, so.
Very conflicting. I think just from the onslaught, my father, we have a complicated relationship because he is someone who was abused by his father. He's an alcoholic, so he was verbally and sometimes physically abusive towards my mother.
And so, Black Men Dream became a project that would go on to show across the world and have Black men from all over the world responding to the questions using the hashtag online, and it just sort of did its thing that I never thought it would do, and so I'm really thankful for that. Later on, I would go on to Yale University, um, and I was in the sculpture program. But of course, my background being photography, I had been using cameras since I was in high school, inspired actually by my grandmother and Tyra Banks' America's Next Top Model. And so photography is like a baby to me. And though I was in sculpture, I continued to make photographs. And one of the photographs I made is this work called Brush Your Blues. And I guess you can say that it sort of emerged out of a sort of longing and yearning that was occurring for me in wanting a sort of relationship, and then I made this work. I don't know what to say else about it, but it's definitely one of those moments in my practice where um, what I have been using black and white photography to sort of talk about more tumultuous experiences. And so here we have this sort of gradient of grays that um, just depict this moment of intimacy between two black men. The next work is the current body of photography that I've been working on over the past year. And the series is called Notes Towards Becoming a Spill. And in the series, you have Black men from multiple places, like here in Pittsburgh, um, the South, Jacksonville, Florida, Miami, and so forth, all from various backgrounds. And in these stage portraits, I have them with their eyes closed, and their facial expressions are that of a sort of ecstatic, and they are sweating profusely in the images. There's some surreal moments happening, like this, for instance, and a lot of this work um, comes from this idea of blue space that I'll talk about in a bit. But the sweat is sort of a representation of what of desire that comes from beneath the flesh, that is the surface and rising to the surface of the body. Um, and their eyes being closed is to um, with to point towards some things that are being withheld. When I'm doing portraiture, um, obviously the images are very staged, as I said, and I kind of want to have something in there that I can't capture necessarily, something that's just between the subject and their psyches, and it's a great way to point towards that interior world. Uh, and so, yeah, this is the new body of photography called Notes Towards Becoming a Spill, and the spill is this idea of boundlessness, this idea of moving and navigating through the world unconstrained, just as a spill would. And so, but to continue on with outside of the photography, but link it up with a lot of the earlier work in installation and sculpture. Um, while at Yale, I like I said, my work was dealing with this idea of the psychological landscape of Black manhood and our emotions and all the things that sort of get wound up in our head, as Mary Alexis talks about, like racial drama, and I wanted to begin to expound those ideas into architecture and space, um, and the first work that I made um, with those ideas was called "To Bathe the Mirror." Sorry about the finicky uh, playback, but "To Bathe the Mirror" was the beginning of these series of blue spaces that I have been working on for the past several years, for the past 3 years, and this idea of blue space, which is just bodies of water, and the closer you live to bodies of water, the better you're off mentally, and yeah, this obviously Black people, we have a very both like fraught relationship with water, but then also it's also a site for refuge, and it has been a site for refuge for us. And I used that idea to sort of lead me into this conversation around the color blue and the blues, and how they've been um, a poignant part of Black expression, a poignant part of the way that we sort of illustrate our interior lives. And digging further, the work I learned of the color haint blue, which haint is just Southern vernacular for ghost. And it was created, haint blue was created off the coast of the Carolinas and plantations where indigo was a cash crop. And in that mixture, they used this haint blue as a spiritual marker on the enslaved. Used this haint blue as a spiritual marker on their homes, where they would paint the frames of their windows and the frames of their doors and the ceilings of their porches this color, as they believed it to ward off evil energies or ghosts, because they believed ghosts would mistake this color for water and they couldn't cross inside of their homes. And so in my work, like To Bathe the Mirror, and this work on screen now, Notes Towards Becoming a Spill, which was an installation at the Atlanta Contemporary in 2019, is using haint blue within that same vernacular of protecting the interior world, as I sort of talk about constructing spaces that offer a sort of reconciliation point for Black men. And in this installation, we have the room painted entirely haint blue with a mound of soil and a glass sculpture of my head embedded in that mound of soil, while a soundtrack plays of queer Black men, uh, essentially offering a sort of testimonies and sort of spilling out their emotions. And so this is sort of the second in this series of blue spaces that I have been working on. The next work is entitled The Language Must Not Sweat, and it was an installation at the Locust Projects in Miami. The Language Must Not Sweat being a quote from Morrison. And at the time of thinking about this project, I was sort of thinking about the ways um, uh, sort of gender performance becomes exhausting, and how it sort of becomes a sort of its own sort of like mechanism inside of our bodies that we sort of repeat on until enough is enough. And so that was sort of like the beginning ideas of this work, The Language Must Not Sweat. What you've noticed, and like in the beginning, I pointed out the soil in my work, and that first installation here in Pittsburgh. And as you can see, it sort of lived on in these more recent works. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to work with these materials that point towards transformation, cultivation, and particularly materials that I like to label carry a sort of a lowliness to them. And in that lowliness, I think, it sort of embodies the way that Black people have always sort of had to go underground to seek a sort of sense of levity for themselves, whether it be the sort of, the Underground Railroad, or for queer people, it was the nightclub and us going underground. And but then also Black people, we have blue light basement parties, and so I love the idea of working with Black material culture in my work, to point towards all of this. And so this continues with the work Feeling the Spirit in the Dark here at in Pittsburgh at the Mattress Factory. Again, sort of working with these materials, these lowly materials like water, um, soil, and glass, which I characterize as a Black queer material because it avoids stasis. It can be um, both liquid, gas, solid, and it's in that sort of boundlessness, that multiplicity, that this idea of spilling again sort of occurs to me. Um, and so we can sort of just kind of go through these images across the space. The idea behind Feeling the Spirit in the Dark was to construct a space that was oscillating between both ideas of like of pleasure, but then also the sacred, and sort of locating the blurriness between the two. The title comes from um, a text by E. Patrick Johnson called Feeling the Spirit in the Dark, expanding notions of the sacred amongst the African American gay community. But then also, as we know, the song Feeling the Spirit by Aretha Franklin. And, I love the idea of the way that sort of oscillation can occur, just in the title alone. But I wish I could explain further the sort of the each installation. But the show is up until hopefully June. Here, if you are here in Pittsburgh, the Mattress Factory will be reopening very shortly, and you'll be able to experience the work in person, because it's very sensory. I don't like to like give everything away, but again, we sort of see this idea of me constructing space for Black queer people, um, to sort of feel a sense of levity, and through the sort of use of dark and through the use of light, which for me in itself is a queer material. Um, Growing up, I would often shrink myself to fit into these boxes of boyhood, of manhood, and light for me is a material that doesn't shrink itself. And so, in that way, it becomes a sort of liberatory material in my practice that I use to express that. And so I believe we have a few questions. And so I wanted to look these over really quickly. Okay. You talked about the haunted dreams with the balloon. Can you talk about how other dreams affect your work and how you see your work affected by and or called into being by the subconscious? Is making art a part of your release from what haunts you? Yeah, especially that particular body of work, hashtag Black Me Dream, which included the series of photographs and the documentary. Um, I didn't have the language for that at the time, but making that work was in fact cathartic. It was therapeutic, and me trying to sort of release essentially what had been building up within me. I have a history of that actually as a child. Um, I would draw these figures that had bodies that were both um, uh, feminine and masculine, and I would sketch them, and I would crumble them up and hang and hide them under the bed of my grandmother's room. And my grandmother's a hoarder, and so it was in during my time at Yale, again in my MFA, they discovered these drawings that I had crumbled up and hid under her bed, um, um, essentially sort of trying to figure out my sexuality at a young age, a very young age, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And so, yeah, so art has always sort of been a way for me to sort of describe what has been haunting me. Um, Could you talk about how you understand collaboration in your work, why you're drawn to it, how you balance the energy with your own work, etc.? I'm thinking about the newer work with other artists who are included in or responding to your art, but also about working with people you photograph. Yeah, collaboration is very important. I think it comes out of a specifically Black queer tradition of artists and poets working together um, to sort of make a thing. And I think it's important that we have these sort of transactional experiences with one another to sort of continue on building up our own sort of legacies and archives and communicating with younger generations, and while also bringing in and looking to the forms of the past of previous generations. So collaboration in that vein, with me working with the performers and the poets for these recent videos, is sort of taking after that. But then also, as someone who uses photography, I'm working with a lot of different people. Well, not that many, but I'm working with a very core group of people who I'm getting to know, and photographing them in the process of getting to know them. And a lot of that is about trust. And I think. One of the reasons why I sort of continue to have those really great experiences with photographing people um, across, their as we're growing up together, essentially is because of that trust um, and, and wanting to work towards a common goal. Um, let's see. Uh, as a multimedia artist, how do you know which medium works best for your ideas for each project? When do you prioritize each of your image tools? Um, so I'll be honest, I really just trying to kind of do what I want. I think often artists are expected to work in sort of one way, and become known for working in that one way. But for me, I think I need to express myself in a variant of ways and just experiment and see what happens. I'm really called to do that. And I think sometimes I do feel um, embarrassed or way in a way, or kind of sad about that, because I think the pressure of wanting of artists working in one way does get to me. But I know that some things are a word, but some things are a sentence, and some things are a paragraph. I don't know if that makes sense, but like it's just like I gotta kind of build up my own sort of universe um, through all these different mediums and working in that way. Um, you said you were in Yale sculpture program while still maintaining a passion for photography. Did you ever see your photography background influence your work in sculpture? Does your education in sculpting influence your photography now? Yeah, actually, I think a lot of the previous ideas with the photography, excuse me, was this idea of how I can take what I was working in the 2D, and bring it into the 3D. And a lot of that was sort of like figurative, these sort of figure sculptures, these early things that nobody knows about. But then the idea of how I construct space or compositions in photographs carries on into how I'm working through and weaving um, um, installations in physical space. Um, and so yeah, it's photography sort of still uh, captures a lot of how I'm going about constructing spaces in my installations. And even like, I can think of like a very personal example. My grandmother, who I grew up with, uh, in her house, she had photographs all over the place, hung salon style, actually. And she's someone who I always I sort of name as a photographer, and that she was someone who I learned about the camera from. And in her home, I think seeing how she lived amongst photographs have influenced the way I take the photograph in itself and make it more sculptural by assembling it with other objects or other photographs to sort of create more of a collage or sculptural sort of form, even though I'm still working for photograph. But that's just like a sort of another example. A few of the videos have background noises of water or rain. Is there any particular reason for that? Can you speak more to how you consider sound in your work? Yeah. So in the videos that we watched today, there's always sort of this sound of liquid um, occurring, and even in a lot of the installations, there's this sort of recurring sound of liquid or moisture happening. And it's just to sort of get at the sort of plasticity of Blackness, the plasticity of being queer, and wanting to sort of pursue a sort of more boundless, or like I said, a sort of spill in terms of like our representation. In what ways do you feel your work has been most successful in reconciling some of the damage done by masculine toxicity and challenging existing perspectives? Well, I think we have a huge part. A huge part of it is um, getting people to be more open and to express themselves and open up, even if it happens on a sort of smaller scale, like with the documentary hashtag Black Men Dream. Um, I think even if it just happens for me and you know in my own sort of world, um, I find that to be a success and becoming more vulnerable, becoming more malleable, um, and sort of unlearning a lot of the things that we could condition to adapt to, and for me, I think it's a long road, and I don't know um, if it'll ever like be this sort of mass thing that happens just because of art. But I think I'm stating my case. So much of your work speaks about include seemingly conflicting emotions and concepts, thinking about the balloon as both death and hope, but also water as refuge and a source of fraughtness. Can you talk more about interest in the push and pull of these ideas coexisting? Yeah, I think one thing I try to avoid with the work is a sort of didactic interpretation, and I think wanting to sort of layer things in a very complex way through these sort of oscillating or polar opposites of ideas is a huge part of how I've constructed space um, to again sort of point towards the sort of nonlinear experience of being Black and queer. And so things sort of oscillate between um, these sort of opposites to create a sort of tension. Our last question is, how do you decide whether the sitters in your portraits and videos will face the camera or not? I'm thinking of the back turned figures that appear in your work. So in a lot of the earlier work, um, I would have the subjects, the people I photograph, um, face with their backs turned to the cameras or rendered to the camera. Um, and a part of that was sort of getting at this idea of refusal, um, which I've since sort of like tried to illustrate in um, the newer photographs with the people with their eyes closed. And so that's sort of where that idea um, compositionally originates from. And I believe that was our last question. Um,
Thank you so much, Shikeith. That was such an evocative and stunning event. I feel very honored to be in your presence, and I'm sure I speak for everyone that we feel very honored. This is very breathtaking. I too wanted to thank Dr. Irvin Dyer again for the support and support from August Wilson House. And I want to tell everyone that's viewing with us today to be sure to check out the links that are in the chat for more info about Shikeith, about CAAPP, and about the August Wilson House. We will see you next time. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.